right. Baahubali Part 2, the conclusion. Make sure to go back and watch the first part we watched. This now the first movie about 2.5 hours. The second one was right near 3 hours. I watched the Hindi version again. Turns out the Hindi.
I switched around. I don't remember because Megan. I watched it with Megan, my wife, and she really wanted to listen to the singing stuff in the original language. And so we were trying to figure out which, because no matter which version you pick, it sounds dubbed.
That's what I couldn't figure out. Everything sounded dubbed.
Nothing sounds like, so I was like, it was hard to find, but, and especially on Netflix, there's like 4 versions of it, of the movie, of both of them.
Yeah. That's what I'm trying to figure out what. I'm like, okay. I clicked on the English one for a second and I was like, no.
Yeah.
I can't even slightly judge this film. I have to watch it in terrible dubbing. Terrible.
Well, this is, and no, you may disagree with this, and I didn't mention it in the last video, but I think this is something that Western culture can learn from these movies. Did you think the opening title sequence was really cool?
The first one?
Yeah.
First one, yeah, I was like, okay. Like, I was like,
it starts, and I'm like, whoa, what is this movie? I was like, because I didn't realize it was a title sequence. It shows these giant elephants and these people pulling up this like thing that's on fire. And I'm like, well, this is really cool. And then it just cuts back and it's the title sequence. And I was like, whoa, this is like a cool opening. And the second one does a similar thing, doesn't it? I remember it not being quite as cool, but it does.
The second one it doesn't quite have the, it wasn't as impressive in the opening.
Yeah.
It was kind of doing a previously on.
Oh yeah. But I thought that like, I thought that was a cool idea to kind of have like they obviously put a lot of time and money into just this showing the name of the movie.
Yeah.
And I would say it kind of sets the tone for the movie, although I don't think it does. But it's a cool way in that I was like immediately impressed and like interested of like, oh, this is cool.
Yeah. So okay. So I'm gonna assume of course people have seen the first part and you've actually watched the movie. Hopefully you've actually watched the movie. This is on Netflix now. This next one, this is what we're talking about. Is kind of weird because I was thinking about this, and it's really weird to compare this. As much as I hated the first movie, I had some rage and anger, but I kept thinking about in the comparing it in the sense of one of the issues I had at the beginning of the second one was I kept thinking about Godfather 2.
Yeah. It reminded me a lot of Godfather 2.
In the original Godfather 2 edit, they talked about that the scenes cut between Michael and then his father cutting back were much longer originally.
Mm-hmm.
And then they cut him down. They realized they started cutting him in smaller blocks back and forth. And while I was watching this, I kept thinking the second part, I was like, why are these things so long? I was like, both this movie, the first and second one, I feel like could have been edited together, or not to one movie. You could make it 2 movies, but so that we get much more of a back and forth story.
Yeah.
Of what's going on, and not so much of like we did in the first one. You get this hour-and-a-half straight thing, and then you get this long sequence in the past, and then this one, pretty much the entire film is past.
Mm-hmm.
Like the last 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And I kept thinking, I was like, to make me care about what happened in the beginning of the first one, it would have been nice to have this back and forth the whole time, telling the story, so that I was caring the whole time. Because I kept going like during this one, I kept going, when are we gonna go back to the beginning? What's happening? Like,
well, and this is what I meant. This is what I meant by the last video we did is the biggest issue I have with this movie was the editing, because you have this hour-and-a-half opening to the first one that I didn't hate, but I was confused and just I was like, I potentially could hate it depending on how it ended. I was just kind of waiting for something to happen, but then I liked the last hour of the movie. And then this one continues that back plot. And I remember it going and being like, why did I care about that whole first hour-and-a-half of the first movie? Like everything that I'm interested in is this flashback stuff.
Yeah.
And again, you're going to have to walk me through the events in order, because I watched this about a month ago. But I remember, I just remember being like, why did they, like you said, why didn't they just have short 15-minute cut back and forth or 20-minute things, especially in the first one, where you have over half the movie, which nothing really happens, and then an hour of the movie that's actually interesting. cut them both together so that you're interested the whole time.
That's what I kept thinking during this. I was like, man, this is just a straight. This is almost should be called, the first one's called The Beginning, but this one feels like it should be called The Beginning.
Yeah.
But it's actually it's you're like watching a prequel basically through the entire thing in the story. So yeah, this one opens up, and we know from the last one that the guard who Katapa, the one who has been so loyal to Babadal or to
Baahubali.
Babadook. Babadook from Babadook for the Babadook. He ends up being the one that actually is going to at some point betray him, and so it starts setting up this whole plot line. Now, I would say right from the beginning, my thoughts on the second one is this one. I don't like this movie. There's not a question for me. I don't like it, and I'm not scared to say it. But this one is significantly better than the first one, because this one actually has plot. It actually shows characters. It has quote unquote political intrigue. It has people doing things and making moves. It has it has these emotional things happening. It had stuff that it actually had more than one thing that I kind of went, oh, okay, that's interesting. Oh, yeah. I see what they're doing there. That's, like none of it I considered high level. It was like real low level Game of Thrones stuff. Yeah. But still, it still had things happening that I was like, okay, so this is going on. Now, the thing it started with, though, that I really just, that I didn't have much hope for initially was this love story that occurs with Baahubali, where he sees this princess and he needs to find a princess so when he when he becomes king and all this stuff, and he for some now I don't know, maybe it's a cultural thing, I don't understand, but his way of going about this is taking his servant who's and acting like he's stupid, like he can't fight, that he's slow in a certain sense. He can't do anything, and he plays this whole thing up in this goofy manner of going there and building up this other guy who's like, well,
wait, before we get to that, so there's this scene, when he first sees her and he like falls in love, and then there's this fight scene with him and Katapa where but then Bahu's like in love, so he's not paying attention. And they're just like destroying these guys, but like by accident. So there's just a lot of like Hobbit from the movie Hobbit, where it's like you're just throwing things behind your back and people are catching things, and it's this really like comedic, goofy scene of them just like kicking everyone's A, and I immediately am just confused by the scene because there's this guy who's like sits on top of, remember the guy is up on top of this little building thing, and I'm like, who is this guy? And I don't know what's happening. And then, like you said, so then they go, so Bahubali's like, basically, I gotta get this girl to fall in love with me. But there's this other guy who's in love with her, who's trying to win her heart. And like you said, so his plan is to make this guy seem like the best in the world. Like, so like they do like shooting competitions with bows, and Bahubali like moves his arm so this guy keeps winning and doing all the best stuff. And then Bahubali's pretending to be a moron and doesn't know anything. So yeah, I still don't understand. I have no idea. No. I was confused, and it goes on for a long time. And and then Katapa gets really goofy. Like who was it Bahubali that was injured? And then Katapa's like, who's gonna sing and pray for him? And he's like crying and running around. And I'm like, I don't know what's happening.
I thought the movie was getting worse. At this point, I was like, the sequel's worse. At this point, I
was like, why is this? There's no reason. I was like, I can't see anything in the future justifying this, and nothing did justify it. But they like hunt boar together, and they're just going and going and going, and I don't know what's happening. And by the way, this is Devasena, right?
Yeah.
So this is the woman who will give birth to the future Bahubali, which really makes a lot of weird implications about her son being her husband, and like anyway. But um eventually this culminates in the idea of um uh Bahubali's brother, um
But
uh
this part was interesting.
Baladeva, right?
Yeah,
Baladeva demands that gets to marry her.
because he finds out
Yeah.
this was the first thing that happened that I was like,
Mhm.
okay, I'm interested. And this
Yeah.
interesting plot wise, we got to think. We get this political move, if you want to call it, basically by this brother. He's mad Bahubali is going to become king. He finds out Bahubali is acting like a moron to try to. He's in love with this girl, so he intentionally, because Bahubali hasn't said anything, goes to his mother and is like, "This is the girl that I want to marry." Then.
Mhm.
So he intentionally sends this over to steal this girl and to cause this massive issue.
Yeah.
Now, this so then we get some so the girl finds out and she's just like, no. Like and she's not only like no, and she gets the okay from her parents, but she almost causes a war because
Yeah.
she's like really mean.
Yeah. I know, it was kind of weird why. I don't know what the offense was. I mean, they were just like, hey, he wants to marry you. And then she's just like, you guys are worthless and only care about stupid stuff. And I hate you. And
Yeah.
you're like, what did that calm down?
And it almost causes this war. And then Katapa, who I guess from being all this time from the fake being stupid, is really dumb. And he's like, oh, he misreads the message. And he's like, he thinks that they sent a message saying that she should marry Bahubali.
Yeah.
So he's like, well, she said no. And Bahubali's like, well, this is even better for some reason.
I would love to hear an explanation of what's going on there.
Yeah,
I don't understand.
I don't understand his plan whatsoever, and it doesn't make any sense to me in the end. But they end up calling for Bahubali because of what she did. They say you need to basically capture her and bring her to us.
Mm-hmm.
Now, maybe I zoned out from boredom at this point because this part was really boring. But then they decided to do that. But then their kingdom that Bahubali snuck into, this smaller kingdom, comes under attack.
Mm-hmm.
Now I don't know who they're attacked from.
I assumed it was Mashi whatever the his kingdom.
That's what I thought,
but I couldn't figure it out.
Killing everybody.
Huh? Yeah, I know. Why was he killing his own people?
That's why I couldn't figure out who these people were. I was like confused, and I was like, "That's what I thought." But then I was like, "Well, that can't be. He wouldn't just be fighting his own people."
And we get some great action scenes though, because remember Katapa takes off the door,
yes,
and then he like pushes the guys, and that was great. And then Devasena has always struggled with shooting multiple arrows at once, like a big dumb idiot.
Yeah.
And he teaches her how to shoot 3 at once. I think maybe he does 5 at once. I don't remember. But they just start taking people out with some terrible CGI arrows. Like, it's like CGI arrows have to be one of the easiest thing to CGI because we've been doing it for 50 years and it looks fine.
Yeah.
These shots, because we have the Legolas thing where he's just doing this, and then the arrows are flying over, but they don't look like they've been in the scene at all. Really good scene though. And this is the thing, and that's why I said you're not afraid to say you hated it. I'm not afraid to say I loved it. Every time there's an action scene, I was like, this is fantastic. I'm loving everything. And it culminates with him lighting a bunch of cattle on fire. And then he sends them in. And I was like, yeah.
Yeah, he lights all the cattle, which up close, he jumps on, it looks okay, and then it always cuts back and it looks like it's made for 25 cents. So I kept cutting. Yeah. Now, the one thing you can't miss is that this guard that was in love with the princess that he'd been building up for some reason, I guess that's supposed to culminate in the fact that the guard now, he turned out like can't fight and is actually scared, but then he like gives him a motivational speech.
Oh man.
Like at the end of Raw Deal. And he gives him this moment. He's like, there's time to step up as a man.
Yeah.
And the guy's like, okay. And he has a dagger. And then the entire, like 12 dudes bust in. And he's like, and he gets beat up real quick. But then he's motivated by Bob.
Yeah.
And he begins to fight in front of these ladies who are very impressed.
Yeah. So there's these women, all these hot women, and this guy is a coward, right? Like you said. And so Bahubali comes in and they're like, you have to protect us, but Bahubali's got other stuff to do. Yeah. And so instead he just gives him a knife and is like, it's time to step up and be a man, and then just leaves. And I'm like, what a gamble. Like what a gamble he just took. Because if this guy is really a coward, which there's no reason to believe he's not.
Yeah.
I mean, he's bad at everything. And if he tries his best and just fails, all these women are just dead. And instead of Baahubali just like killing them all really quick, because he can, basically lift buildings, he's just like deal with it yourself. And but it works out, and they all become friends. And by the way, the scene was really good when that guy, I can't remember his name, the coward, he he's trying to split the block of wood in his bedroom, and then all the women show up and they're like, and he's like, oh, I don't have a block of wood. And they're like, there's one here, and it's just like, and you're just like, why didn't I know about this comedy? Like, I didn't know there was these comedic geniuses in Bollywood, these undiscovered gems. Although I'm pretty sure they're discovered because, like a billion people.
Yeah. So there, you have that giant action scene, which Bahubali even goes up and breaks a dam, right? He just washes everybody away. He does all these things. He brings this guy back. He's like, sorry, he abandons that guy. He's like, sorry if everybody gets raped or something like that. And then he runs out, jumps out. Then he rides on top of cattle. He's taking everybody out. Then he lands back up on top, and he's just like, they're like, oh, we did it, blah, blah, blah. And that woman's like, he receives this note right at the end of it. This bird flies down, and they're like, what is it? And he's like, it says I must capture the queen. And the woman's like, you, basically the princess is like, you a-hole. Like, I don't trust you anymore, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden the guy's like, you don't know who you're talking to. He's Baahubali. And then all of a sudden like his entire thing burns off. He sets
his clothes just burn off.
Off. And he's got the thing, and everyone starts, and then the princess is suddenly just like, I will follow you anywhere.
Yeah.
I will risk my life absolutely for you. And he's like, and then basically in a sense they get married right there.
Yeah.
Obviously, because he's just like, look, I'm with you till I'm dead. You're with me, and we dedicate each other.
Because again, he's Shiva, right? Yeah. So he's a god. So everybody, like, you're not just going to turn him down, like, because his clothes burned off to reveal like this plate of armor, right?
Yeah. Like
this magical plate of armor suddenly is on him, and he's just like, I am basically, again, he's like this Christ type figure. Like, I'm much better in every way than all of you. And so she immediately like kneels and is like, okay, yeah, I'll follow you. And so now we know we're getting to a situation. So again, at this point, I was now interested in the storyline, but I don't know why it took so long to get here. I could have done a little, like, I disliked the opening of this movie more than the first one, in the sense that I cared less about the rom-com than I did just about the idea of this guy trying to climb a waterfall, and I'm not sure why. Because at least the waterfall, I was like, it was funny, and he jumps weird, and he's doing all this crazy stuff, and the waterfall keeps changing, and you're like, well, I don't understand what. But this, I'm like, I not only could I not follow what was going on, there was so much comedy. And I don't know to what end, like, what is this leading up to, and why do we care? And then when you find out what it's leading up to, you're like, you could have edited this down to 20 minutes. Like,
there was
nothing to this. So anyway, he goes back, because now there's going to be this big issue between him and his brother of who gets this girl, right?
Yeah. So he goes back, and he brings her back, and then you have this big sequence when they go into the giant thing, and the queen's like, all right, who are you? And then the woman announced herself, and then she's like, I apologize for being so rude. And the queen mother's like, no, that actually makes you stronger. Now go stand by your husband. Well, then now we get the wacky, they didn't realize. So she starts to go to Baahubali, and they're like, whoa, wait a minute. You're supposed to be with my other son over here. And then it was like, and everyone's like shocked. No one knows quite what to do. And then
just before we go on, because this isn't, we haven't talked much about it, but these scenes, they're so dramatic that I just found so entertaining, because there's constant zooming up of everyone's faces. Everyone's always spinning and turning towards the camera. Baahubali is not an attractive guy. And it's just so funny, because it seems like a joke, because it's this ugly guy who's clearly supposed to be the sex symbol.
Yeah.
And so it's always like turning slow motion, and like his hair is flipping. And so even in these scenes that like aren't necessarily, even let's like this scene actually mattered to the plot. But if you take scenes that don't even matter to the plot, I was still interested, because I felt like the editing was just entertaining in and of itself. where when you get into Hollywood or American filmmaking, nobody's editing to make anything interesting. If you have a boring movie, if it's just not, if you're not like The Godfather, if you're not interested in the plot of the characters, the editing and how people are just keep turning and staring at each other is not going to save the movie for you. But this movie's like,
So yeah, there's always the term because they'll do something and then someone goes like,
yeah,
then it zooms up on their face
it's yeah,
and
oh,
just like with me or something, like almost every time they zoomed up on Bahubali's face, I was like, gross. It kept
always good.
zooming up on him like I was supposed to be turned on, and I was like, ew. And so yeah, they kept doing these dramatic things. You know, I feel like they know that they're like, oh, this scene sucks. Let's zoom up quickly and make sure everybody really understands how shocked these people are by these sequences.
Yeah.
So yeah, so the basically Bahubali's like, no, look, I've dedicated myself to her. She's my wife. This is basically, this is how it's going to go. But this causes obviously a massive offense, right? This causes a massive offense to the point that the queen's like, well, I guess you're not going to be king.
Yeah, she's going directly against the wishes of the queen.
Yeah,
just
which he doesn't do. This is the big part of his character. Now, to the point that I would say the relationship between Bahubali and the Queen Mother in this movie is a bit weird and creepy at times. The way they're laying and talking to each other or touching fingers, he's a little too into his mom, and she's a little too into his Bali.
Yeah, and this continues throughout his incarnations because, as we see, the modern Bahubali is identical in every way, and his mother was in love with essentially him.
Yeah,
and so there's the implications of what's going on are very strange, and that's why I'm wonder, and again I'd be interested to learn why they didn't have two different actors play Bahubali, and I don't know if it's because they're supposed to be reincarnated identically, or if it's because people are. It's just an interesting choice.
Yeah.
And again, the idea of reincarnation is a really cool thing that's very underexplored in our filmmaking culture. You just don't see it a lot. I assume it's explored a lot in the Eastern filmmaking, and I think it's cool. But I was very confused by it because I just am not used to it.
Yeah, no, and I agree that bring up those kind of questions about American watching. Okay, so he's the exact same guy. They're using the exact same actor. Okay, like doing that sort of thing. They're really making him look the same. So kind of the confusion about that because it's not really part of our culture and most people's beliefs. People talk about reincarnation all the time, obviously, but it's not really part of most people's beliefs in the West.
Yeah,
it's not normal everyday belief you hear about. It's mostly from the hippie that's talking about what he thinks is going to happen. So yeah, it's not taking their, but I think as a thematic, as the idea of using a movie, I think it's great. I think it can be used awesome. So he gets Bahubali gets basically put in. It's like, okay, you're not king anymore. You'll take over the troops, and he's like, whatever. I just want to be with this woman. Like this has never been his thing, anyways. He's never trying to do all this sort of stuff. But his wife, well, she kind of goes and screws things up a little bit. I'll just say that. Once they're there, they're trying to find out the king at this point, him taking over and everything. He's trying to figure out, obviously, a way, and his dad's trying to figure out a way of getting Bahubali completely out of the way. And Bahubali goes out of his way and ends up knocking his wife up. They don't show how. I'm guessing through a dance number and a music video set. But he ends up knocking her up, and so everybody's okay. She's the one. This is the next kid that's coming, and everything like that. And she is this princess, and she's an important person, obviously. But at one point, she's trying to go up through this thing, and she gets blocked off by a guard. He's like, "You need to go this way." And as she's going up, this guy is he's caressing the ladies as they come up through this thing. Like, and so he's kind of he's not doing anything like wild. Like,
he's just being weird.
He's just more being weird. It's like touching him on the arm and the back. Like he's doing stuff. And when she sees this and he looks at her and he's like, "What's up?" Like basically he's like, you will be fondled. She's like, you're not going to touch my arm or back. And as he reaches out, she pulls out a knife and chops all the fingers off of his one hand. And she's immediately put on trial and she's chained up, which we know is a big deal. And they're like, we got to put this on trial. And they let you know immediately in this kingdom that they say, she's like, I haven't been proven anything. He's like, well, in here you're guilty until proven innocent. And so Bahubali shows up and he's like, what the frick? Like,
Yeah, and the way he enters is really good.
yeah.
It's very intense. The whole thing is like there's a lot of like slow motion walking and staring, and
I thought this is a Zack Snyder across the board with all the slow motion in these films. Constant slow motion. This movie is about 15 minutes long and 2 hours and 45 minutes of slow motion.
Yeah.
He enters now, and that was the exact moment I remember going like, this seems so dramatic again. Like again, we're cutting to such dramatics of him entering the room. It's like, oh crap, Mr. Sexy's here. And he comes in and he's like, what the frick? Why do you have my wife chained up? Now, he's a little, again, I understand, but Bahubali gets a little annoying here in the sense of he's like, my wife, who is a hothead, who did almost start an entire war because she can't, an entire war because she didn't want to be, offered a marriage. Like, what did she do? Why is she chained up? And they're like, and then was like, yeah, I haven't been, now we all saw her chop the fingers off. But she's like, I haven't been proven guilty or anything. And then right when she's okay, so this is one of my favorite parts. And I don't know what it says about the Bahubali character, but I do think to a certain extent it's the only time his character does anything that I consider that could be deemed in a sense not good. Where he's in the court, they're gonna have the court real quickly. He's just like, we're not even gonna have this court. What happened? And the wife's like, he was touching people inappropriate, and he's like, you know what the curse is for that? Death. And he just turns around and chops the dude's head off.
Yep.
And everyone's like, what the frick?
Yeah.
Now I feel like the movie sold it as that was still just a righteous thing he did, and we were supposed to, everybody else is bad. But I was kind of like, okay, but you kind of, I'm not sure what this was achieved. Like the other guy didn't even get a chance. He's just like, you did what? Bam, head cut off, justice served.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if we're supposed to take it as showing his passion and his frustration, like almost like righteous anger, where we know the guy did wrong, and Bahubali's wise enough where he knows that it's true. Like he doesn't really need, because he's God in a sense, he doesn't necessarily right now need, maybe sometimes he needs a trial. This doesn't need a trial. He knows what happened. He's putting justice through.
Yeah.
Or if we're supposed to look at it like I'm not sure if we're supposed to look at it more of like he kind of lost his temper, or if he's just the just God who again, if we look at kind of through a Christian lens of the God that gets jealous and angry of like, you've taken my wife and put her in chains, you didn't even tell me, and you put her in chains for something because another guy touched her, like, and so you get this Jesus in the temple type thing where it's like the righteous anger suddenly flares up, and then you're like, well, Jesus, you don't need to necessarily knock over everyone's temple or tables. You could probably just go and like politely escort everyone out, but or like with Old Testament, you don't need to necessarily open up the whole earth and swallow everybody up. You could have just called out and said, hey, everyone stop being bad or whatever. But so I'm not sure if we're supposed to look at it like that or not, because it's such a weird character in that I don't know what's supposed to be human and what's supposed to be God. But at the same time, he seems to take law and kingdom very seriously sometimes, and then sometimes it's like, well, as long as we're doing it as love is what all that matters, like we're doing these, it doesn't matter what the law says because it's immoral. But then sometimes it's like, well, the penalty is death, so I'm just going to cut your head off.
Well, that seemed to be the point they were trying to show. If there was a flaw, quote unquote, that they were showing with him in his own quote unquote downfall, was again is the classic thing that the girl becomes his downfall. He can't quite clearly see things because he falls in love with her, and then once he falls in love with her, her temper and her own things puts him in situations where he has to defend.
Yeah.
And because he chops this guy's head off, he's immediately like, "You're out." They're like, "You're gone. You're they're not going to kill
so
you."
He gets kicked out of basically the kingdom and everything with his wife, And then we kind of have this scene that, again, kind of reminiscent of like a Jesus scene where they're poor and he's just spending time with the poor people and helping them, blessing them. And we get this montage of basically he becomes this savior figure to like all the outcast poor people. Is that kind of what you felt too in
Yeah, it was
that
pretty
scene?
much that. It was just showing. It was like, okay, now we can see what's it like for our character. Who's this? Why in the future do they look forward to him so much? Right? What is it about his
Hmm.
character that is so beloved to the poor? Also, right? That he was this person, and I guess you could look at it if you're. I don't know if they're going for that, but again, him being the kingdom coming down, this idea of this God coming among men and becoming like
Yeah.
right. So there's kind of this Jesus idea of him coming there and he's helping the poor, doing all this stuff, and even though he's lost everything, he still is just joyful and willing to help, and he's loyal still to the law. Like he's still, he's like still loyal to the kingdom.
Hmm.
Not, he's this kind of person,
He
and
seems to have no like anger about anything.
yeah, he seems to be absolutely fine now. But then in the kingdom, you have his brother, of course, and his brother's dad, who's one of the people. They have this whole scheme going of they're trying to find a way to get rid of Bahubali completely, and so they do a whole scheme of setting up one of the people that the guy that actually the one that was the guy who was the loser who couldn't do it, who was inspired by Bahubali to survive. They
Yeah.
basically trick him into talking him into trying to kill, quote unquote, kill the king.
Hmm.
He shows up with his people. It's a trick. They kill him. They murder everybody. And they set it up that Bahubali sent him to talk to Queen Mother and convince her because like Bahubali's a threat. We had to kick him out. And now he's even sent people to kill the king.
Yeah, and there's this weird legal obligation where Baladeva is the king, but he can't assassinate or command death. Only the Queen Mother can do that,
Yeah.
which is really interesting. And then on top of that, I mean, you can edit all this out if you want because there's a lot of stuff, but the Queen Mother is married to the do they call him the King Father? I don't know, but she's married to this guy who has the weird hand,
Yeah.
and the weird hand guy is very upset because he feels he should have been the king, but his wife was chosen to be the queen and rule because he has a weird hand,
Yeah.
and he goes they hated me because I was disfigured, and so he's jealous and is trying to live through his son who's Baladeva, but he's extra angry because the Queen Mother clearly favors Bahubali, and Bahubali isn't even their blood child.
Yeah.
And so they have to, and the reason they go through all this stuff and fake an assassination attempt and stuff is specifically because they have to get the Queen Mother to okay the assassination attempt of Bahubali, and she's just never going to do it.
Yeah.
Because they've already kicked her out. And so by dreaming up this scheme, she realizes or she believes that Bahubali is breaking into the kingdom to assassinate the king, and therefore, even though she doesn't want him to die, by duty she has to put his end to his life. So she calls on Katapa, who is the main guy, and basically says, "You have to go kill him. This is their only option." This is the first time in the movie. I don't want to say like this was like genius and my mind was blown, but this was the first thing in the movie I didn't realize it would be this smart, where because at this point we really build up a relationship between Katapa and Bahubali, and while again it's not a perfect movie and there's it's really wacky in the beginning, I did feel like I thought I was interested in the relationship, the Katapa Bahubali relationship. And the idea that he was going to kill Bahubali, I was like, oh, that's weird. But I just assumed, oh, well, I guess, someone's going to tell him he has to or something. But I didn't realize there was going to be actually political trickery and lies and schemes and stuff to trick the mother, who then will push Katapa to do the things that neither one wants to do. So I was actually kind of like impressed with the writing at that point because I didn't expect anything nearly that interesting or complicated.
No, absolutely, and I completely agree. I thought, and then the way they did it with Katapa, they're acting like they basically get a Bahubali and they say that they're going to kill Katapa.
Mm-hmm.
He actually shows all the way up to save Katapa. He takes
Yeah.
arrows in the back,
Mhm.
And Katapa's like, do not release me. He keeps trying to actually not to actually.
Mhm.
And he's like, no, I have, I call you, he calls him uncle. And he said, you said you're going to hold my kid. So, this time's coming that he's going to betray him. And so they do a good job of, him, Bahubali, showing that he's willing to sacrifice himself, possibly
Yeah.
die, protect him. And then knowing that when he's doing all that, Katapa is going to stab him. Now, they end up doing that. And he ends up stabbing him, and I thought that was well done. Now, I thought as they did a lot of times, they countered that
Mhm.
with being so obvious with the fact that the king shows up, and then the king is like, tells his whole plan
Mhm.
about what he did, and then begins like hitting with an axe, but you can't see what he's doing, so it just doesn't look very well. But he has to give this whole explanation so Katapa realizes what happened.
Yeah.
And it's almost kind of like a villain cartoon thing where he's like, and I did it, and I tricked my mom, and bought nothing. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, it seemed like for something, the plan that was so smart, the guy got really stupid.
Mhm.
I was like, why do you want Katapa to know what you did? Let him believe what he did, so he's not a threat later in any way, right?
Well, and it does. I mean, not to, because clearly that's a better way to go. But I guess part of the thing though too is because the world that this movie exists in,
Yeah.
he knows Katapa's gonna be true to him,
Yeah.
whether he knows the truth or not. So I felt like it's just a way to torture him. Like he's just like, look what you did it for nothing, and now you still have to do what I say.
But then
Because like if we were right, yeah.
Katapa completely screwed, because then Katapa immediately goes back and then tells the Queen Mother what's going on. So that
Yeah.
completely screws up everything, because it throws this huge wrench
Yeah.
into the whole thing, because and I like that. So he does this, he tells this whole plan. Katapa leaves, he tells the Queen Mother, and then we get a flashback to what just happened 3 minutes ago.
Yeah, that was, yeah. I remember that was like really good where he's like explaining it and then they have flashback. I'm like, do we need to see what just happened literally last scene? Like flashback, like we forgot.
They're showing the king saying this stuff again, showing the stuff. So I said all this stuff. And I'm like, we just watched this.
Yeah, just just watched it. It's literally the last scene. Just we're just replaying the scene twice.
So the king does this, which is the dumbest move in the history of things, because Katapa stays with him, but Katapa tells the mother. So the mother's like, what have I done? This is screw. And then Bahubali's wife has the baby.
Yeah.
So there's enough time that she's able to grab the baby, and they're trying to escape.
Mm-hmm.
King's like, no, we gotta stop this. And the mother runs out on on this boat, and then the king like hits her with an arrow, and she falls in the water. So he figures she's gone. He locks this other girl up, and then we know that obviously she floats down a bit, and then she ends up getting away farther, and ends up taking the new Bahubali and handing him.
Now, I don't know if you noticed, because did you watch these pretty quick together?
Yeah.
So the woman, the Queen Mother,
yeah,
when the older Bahubali was first born, people come after wait, I don't remember now. But anyway, I'm not sure if it happens with the older Bahubali, but anyway, there's a scene where she has the baby Bahubali, I don't remember which one, and in one hand, and she's fighting and she kills the guards with a sword in
the beginning, yeah.
Well, no, in the beginning, but she also does it up in
Oh.
again with Baahubali before that. Yeah. And so I thought that was a clever character and recall thing that they did where and I don't remember if it's with the same baby or if it's with the older Baahubali when he's a baby. But either way, there's two scenes where she holds Baahubali in one arm and has a sword in the other and protects him by killing a bunch of guards. And I thought it was an interesting like callback to be like, anyway, to do that again. The bar is set so low, I feel like, with these things that I'm not like someone put this in the history books. But anytime you see things like that, I'm impressed because I'm not expecting this type of thought.
No,
like I said, yeah.
I'll say fully at the end what I think about it, my thought after watching both of them and everything. But basically, then it cuts back to the present time. Baahubali getting all.
Yeah, and you're like, oh yeah, I forgot this whole.
Yeah, I forgot about this whole plot line. And he's heard the whole story and everything, and so he leads those people over to attack the kingdom. So you're getting the final big thing where he's going to attack him. You get this callback from the opening scene of part 2, which we didn't talk about, but the mom puts like the thing on her head with the fire, and she walks, and then she can't stop.
Yes.
and to be able to do the full ceremony. And Bahubali like runs over and smashes into a giant elephant.
Yeah.
So this they have to do this again, but this time Bahubali's attacking and everything, and everybody's having a big fight. This is when the craziest scene happens in the entire thing, which I was fully on board for, and I just wish they could have made it look better.
Mm-hmm.
When they use the trees to bend
Mm-hmm.
back and shoot as catapults, and
Mm-hmm.
everybody covers themselves in the, and I'd seen this GIF before, and I didn't know what it was from, obviously, but
Yeah.
these people flying in, it was very much like Lord of the Rings, but like even more, way over the top. And they're attacking and they're crashing through, and basically you get, of course, the king where he's like, King Bahu and Bahubali finally have this like, okay, here's the big fight. They're gonna finally meet. It doesn't quite have the emotion because it's not the same Bahubali. So
Yeah, but I think it's supposed to be like
yeah,
he's
and
just born again.
but I wasn't sure if did he actually remember everything,
I
or
think once the story was told, he remembered everything. I think that was the idea.
but yeah, so they end up having this huge, obviously gigantic fight, and they're having this huge thing. The mom's trying to carry the fire and can't stop, which is one of the funniest parts of me.
It's such a weird. I mean, when you're talking about things that you don't understand culturally, like I got it, but it's so foreign that I'm like, I don't. It's just so crazy. But I mean, they did a good enough job where at least I could follow it. Like I knew what
Yeah,
was.
but there's a point where she's going, and they know she's going there, and so they set the bridge on fire so she can't get over, but she can't stop. She
Oh
keeps
yeah.
going, and then they fight and they hit the statue. The head of the statue flies off, crashes, rolls past all the people, all the way to hit the water. So then the water splashes over the thing, and then
Yeah.
she can walk over. The guy, the dad with the gimpy arm, gets punched out by Katapu. Doesn't kill him, but he's like, "You need
Mm.
to do what I have to say." And Katapu's like, "Frick no, I'm my own man now."
Yeah.
He's the king, and they end up having this giant last battle between the king and Bahubali, and Bahubali ends up putting giant chains on his hands. It reminded me of Nicolas Cage and Outcast, but he had snakes. I wish he'd put snakes on.
Yeah, that would have been
Um,
better.
but he puts on these giant chains, and they're fighting this huge, huge battle back and forth of kind of, a spectacle, if you will, of this sort of fight all the way to the very end, which ends up being the king falling on that pit where he's always talking about burning the queen or
Mhm.
burning Bahubali's mom, and they end up lighting him up.
So just quick note on that one. They have she's just chained in the middle of this courtyard that's just all stone.
Yeah,
And then there's this like little hole and that's filled with sticks. And she's like, I've been collecting these sticks. And you're like, where have you been collecting these sticks? Like there's literally nothing around you. I mean, you're like surrounded by miles of just cobblestone. And like somehow she's collecting these sticks. I don't but yeah, he's going to die in there. Like, that's gonna happen eventually. And and he does, and
and
we're
the
all happy.
head. So then there's a scene of which I thought was a great idea. It just looks terrible, but
Mhm.
it's a great idea, and I understand what they're going for, like the symbolism and everything. But the head of that statue ends up
Mhm.
in that river, and it's floating, and it goes
Yeah.
all the way over to the waterfall at the beginning and comes down. But some of it hits, and it looks horrible.
Yeah.
But I understand it lands down at the bottom, and the water's pouring on it, and all this different stuff, and it kind of takes you back to the beginning of this story and everything, and all that was like uh cool. Basically, Bahubali's like, we won, and he's now king. He's there to take care of everybody. Now, the thing about this movie, I thought in the end was, I thought of it, especially as it ended, and one of the last things we'll say for it, but I thought, one, the story, this could be a very solid story, 3 hour story.
Mhm.
Very solid. You edit this into a 3 hour story. You cut way out of like the goofy, romantic comedy plot.
Mhm.
Take a good amount of the chunk of the opening off. You get rid of all. There's a lot of fluff going on. If you
Yeah.
now personally, you get rid of music videos.
Mhm.
You get rid of all that sort of stuff. You really narrow this down to a 3 hour epic story. Now, I think now as the story goes from beginning to end, when I saw the entire story, I thought this could be a good movie.
Yeah.
There's a story here, a mythological story that's playing out that at times can be very engaging.
Mhm.
Um, And so the second movie to me was vastly superior to the first one. It just was, I thought. It the beginning was ended up actually being goofier and weaker, but the second half of the movie, or the last, probably like, you really want to say probably the last 2 hours of the movie, is much more engaging to me than anything in the first movie, or if you want to say almost the first like 4 hours.
Well, how I feel about it is after talking about it, I want to watch it again. Okay, because this movie was good, and the both movies were good. Are they perfect? No. Do you have to get into a different mindset? Yeah. Like, are there hour and a half segments that could be better? Yeah, but I would say that, like, overall, I've just never seen anything like it, and again with the action, I really enjoyed the action. It didn't always look good, but I didn't necessarily need that. I was just to me, this reminded me of kind of like what I feel like Zack Snyder is kind of going for with the DC movies. Of when you look at like his DC characters versus the Marvel characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe,
Yeah.
the Marvel is like supposed to be like these normal people who have these powers, and what do they do? Um, Zack Snyder seems to be more focusing on like creating these almost like gods that walk the earth, right? They're like descendants of gods and all this stuff. And that's kind of what I feel like when I'm watching Bahubali. I'm watching similar types of characters where these aren't necessarily humans so much as they're gods walking the earth, or godlike people walking the earth. The difference between the two movies, other than essentially everything, is that the action, I feel like, is going for something otherworldly.
Mhm.
Where when I watch like Justice League, I'm just getting boring action. Action I've seen a million times. I don't feel like it's otherworldly. Sure, they're super strong or super fast, but but compared to like the Marvel action, I feel like I'm watching the same thing.
Yeah.
Where at least with this type of movie, I felt like the action and the wars and the love stories and everything reflect the otherworldliness of the gods themselves. Again, like I said, my main issue with this movie is the editing. I think if you could edit it to make it a lot more entertaining, you probably edit it down too. But as the movies go, I was especially after the first half of the first one, I was thoroughly entertained. Now the first part of the first one too, I was confused, and like I was like, why don't we pick things up? But I was like interested, and especially when it just got into action and the war scenes, and then towards the end of the second movie with the political stuff. Uh, does it make sense? No. Is there continuity? I don't think so. But the editing was funny. The fights were funny. A lot of the conversations were funny. And then, like I said, I liked the art direction. I really liked the how the castle and the place looked. I liked the costumes. I liked the colors. Um, I liked the really bad CGI elephants constantly walking around, and you're like, I don't even know if anyone tried on this one. Like this stuff, like to me, added to my enjoyment of the whole thing as it went on, and so I'm interested to watch more of these type of movies. Um, uh, yeah, I'm interested in watching more of these type of movies to see if you can get a better mix, in my opinion, better mix of crazy action and more entertaining story.
Yeah.
Like I would like to see Americans filmmakers adopting this type of crazy action and trying to make it feel right in the context of their own movie, because I've just never seen anything like it. And I think American filmmakers are missing that, where all these superhero movies, you're never seeing anything very crazy. It's just punching and shooting and kicking. And it's like, why aren't we doing, you know, why aren't we just going crazy and just going for it and seeing what happens with it?
I I I will end by saying that I see where you're coming from, and I respect it. And I look at what they're doing in these films, and again, I see what I see when I watch this movie is I see potential for an actual good film.
Mhm.
Um, but again, the whole thing to me is almost like dollar store like it's like the dollar store version of the Hobbit. I almost feel like in a lot of ways, like now it's different in the way it's like dollar store Game of Thrones, it's dollar store
Mhm.
Hobbit. It's this really low level. the sort of thing, but I can understand the sort of thing. Now, I would just say overall that I think when it comes to this action and everything they're doing, all of it would work so much better for me if it looked better.
Yeah, and like I said, I don't know how you would mix it, because if you look at The Hobbit, I see what you're saying, because Hobbit has some crazy over the top stuff.
Yeah.
The problem is that I don't feel like it works. Like I'm watching it and I'm just like, I don't feel like this fits in the world I'm watching. And so to me, it just comes across stupid, and I don't know how to reconcile it. But I think when you set it in a mythological world that from the beginning makes no sense. Like and it's like maybe they were trying, but it seems like from the beginning, I don't even feel like anyone's trying to make it make sense. Like you have a woman drown in a river with her hand pointed towards the top of a mountain, and you're like, okay, I'm in this world that's just way over the top. Suddenly I'm willing to like buy into this stuff. With Hobbit and coming off Lord of the Rings, and then you're seeing these scenes with like Legolas and running up the rock as it's falling,
Yeah.
and then the chariots going, everybody's just, orcs are dying everywhere. I was just like, I just don't feel like what I'm watching is even interesting. And so again, I don't know how to reconcile it exactly, but I do feel like there is a place for this type of action, but I don't think Western filmmaking has found it.
Yeah.
You know, but I hope to one day see it.
I want to find it. You know, maybe I don't. Do we want to find it?
I want to find it.
I think
so just really quick, we ended the second one, Megan and I think it was like 12:30 at night. First thing Megan said when we finished it was, "Should we start the first one over again?" I've never seen, she was giving this movie like a 5 out of it. She could not handle how much she loved it. So there's that. I mean, there's people out there that love this stuff.
Yeah, this is right. All right. Well, thank you everybody for watching. Next we will be reviewing another film, but not like a Bollywood film. It's called Article 15. Much different film than my expectations from what I've seen. And thank you for watching.